Today on Doomed! Yoga mats, chakra crystals, and a global satanic child trafficking ring run by baby blood drinking Democrats and Hollywood elites? What's going on here? If you guessed QAnon, well, you'd be onto something. Today on the show, we will be jumping into the world of QAnon, but not the usual stuff we talk about with Donald Trump and the far-right fringe of that movement. We'll be talking about how QAnon has infiltrated the world of the wellness and yoga communities. And we're going to jump into that right now. But before we do that, let me just do the usual patreon.com/MattBinder to support this show. You could go there and whatever you can give, that's always great. But most importantly, youtube.com/MattBinder, subscribe there, and doomedpod.com for all your links to the audio version of the podcast. Now, without any further ado, let me pull us up here on the stream. 1 second. Doop, doop. And joining me now... Oh, I forgot to turn my green screen on. Look at that. Boom. And boom. There we go. Joining me now. She is a digital culture reporter at Insider, Rachel Greenspan. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rachel.
Hi, Matt. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for putting up with my failure of an intro there, because I turned the camera on after the opening intro and I had failed to set my green screen. So people saw the magic, but you're seeing it right now, just the green screen. But on the YouTube feed and elsewhere, they don't see the green screen. But I failed. What's that?
What are they seeing on the green screen?
Now they just see me sitting in a black void.
Okay.
But
that too.
Yeah, but now you just see, but you get to see the background stuff. But I gave them a taste of that too. I messed up, but that's okay. Now, you wrote this great article for Insider that basically dives into how QAnon came to cross over into, usually when we talk about QAnon on this show, it gets mentioned how it's, jumping into other cultures, but usually we talk about the political aspects of it in terms of it being a conspiracy theory to prop up President Trump. But you dived into the part of it that I haven't really jumped too much into on this show, and that is how it has infiltrated the wellness and yoga communities. And before we get to that, though, I ask everyone who comes on the show about QAnon, because there's always a slightly alternative description of it, that they're all accurate, but it's always interesting to hear because there's so many layers to QAnon to begin with. What is QAnon, Rachel?
Well, the way that I like to explain it, and the way that I explain it in my reporting, is that QAnon is a conspiracy theory which has developed into a group of conspiracy theories based on this central idea that President Trump is fighting a deep state cabal of pedophiles, and that cabal is made up of Democrats, celebrities, and other elite officials. George Soros, anyone who has power in the world can be kind of considered by QAnon believers to be part of this, as we know, fictional cabal.
Now, let me ask you this. Before we get to the yoga and wellness aspects of QAnon, what was there like a step in between where QAnon went from just like Trump sycophants to and also people who are probably right-wingers who like Trump that don't realize they are, that description. But from there to the wellness yoga world, was there like a stepping stone?
Yes, there absolutely was. That stepping stone was the pandemic. Basically, when the virus hit, people were paranoid. People are paranoid. People are scared, confused, and as we know, there's been little to no clarity from our government as to what's going on with this virus. And from the beginning, Trump kind of, undermined medical experts in terms of what we know to be true about this virus and how to protect ourselves against it. And so, of course, many Trump supporters began to spread conspiracy theories about COVID and about, how masks can cause health problems, which all of these theories have been debunked repeatedly. But QAnon became kind of had a whole boost, you can say, because there were all these people out there looking for answers and feeling confused and wanting to point blame and wanting to say, no, this virus can't be real. This can't be happening to us. It has to be manufactured. And basically, that brought a lot of people into the world of QAnon, which had previously mostly just existed kind of on the fringes of the internet. It started on 4chan before soon jumping to 8chan, which then became 8kun last year. And now, you can go on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and there's QAnon everywhere. That shift didn't 100% happen because of the pandemic, but certainly when the pandemic hit, QAnon kind of leaders were among the top voices in spreading some of these medical conspiracy theories. And with that, a lot of people, particularly women, who were probably already supportive of Trump to begin with, but there are some people who have discovered QAnon in this camp who kind of aren't even that supportive of Trump. But these people kind of discovered QAnon in the spring as a way to say, oh yes, I knew something was up. I knew something was, I knew that something nefarious was going on. This all makes more sense now. And kind of the same reasons that people often discover religion in times of hardship and confusion. A lot of these people discovered QAnon. And so in May, I wrote about how these lifestyle and wellness bloggers and influencers who are mostly posting about like fashion and beauty and, doing ads for Walmart and Target and talking about parenting are suddenly wearing QAnon hats in their bikini selfies on Instagram. And so that was kind of when this big pivot happened. And then, the yoga aspect of it all came soon after.
Now let me ask you, because on the coronavirus QAnon crossover is something we have talked a lot about on this show. Mm-hmm. Now, do you think that they were these groups, these like Instagram influencers, and then branching out to the beauty influencers, and obviously the yoga and wellness communities? Do you think they were targeted? Or do you think this just somehow naturally appealed to them? And they just, the QAnon conspiracy theorists looking to grow Trump support just accidentally fell into into this world?
Great question. So an important factor here was, as the pandemic was continuing to, cause chaos, this kind of Save the Children movement started budding online this was mostly in June and July of this year. And so again, this was after many of these women had already discovered QAnon, many women in the lifestyle wellness space. They'd already been espousing QAnon beliefs. And then suddenly there was kind of this huge shift in QAnon's focus away from kind of this Hillary Clinton is drinking the blood of babies, Donald Trump is going to save us all kind of extreme rhetoric, into oh, we hate pedophilia, let's save the children, hashtag save the children, hashtag save our children. And so those hashtags started spreading on Facebook and Instagram, mostly spread by these kinds of lifestyle wellness influencers. And so it was kind of that pivot that really brought more people into the fold. And so many of the people who are now like surprisingly spreading QAnon to their followers really did discover it through this Save the Children, Save Our Children hashtag campaign, which was definitely intentional on the part of kind of QAnon's top influencers who are kind of trying to make the movement seem less sketchy and less extreme. And, no one wants to be against ending pedophilia. And I'm sure I think you've talked about this on the show before, but kind of this idea that Trump himself has commented on of, oh, well, QAnon wants to end pedophilia, and that's a great thing, of course. That's actually really dangerous because that's really not what they're trying to do. They're just using pedophilia as an insult or weapon to kind of threaten anyone who disagrees with them. Right.
Trying to end child trafficking and pedophilia by literally doing nothing about child trafficking and pedophilia. It's interesting you brought some of the things you just brought up, because earlier today when I was co-hosting the Majority Report, it came up. I forgot who mentioned it on the show, but either Matt Leck or Brendan on that show brought up how, in a lot of ways, what QAnon is becoming is like the next evolution of the pro-life movement. And in some ways, I do agree in terms of like the religious aspect and the save the children aspect of it. But the real difference to me here is that there is an other side to the pro-life movement. There is the pro-choice movement, and you can argue. There's obviously arguments, and I'm on this side of the arguments, where the pro-choice movement is in the right because it actually gives women power over their bodies, and it puts the health of women first. And when you think of QAnon and the Save the Children and their basically their complete enamoring, they're enamored with this child trafficking aspect of it. There's no other side to argue there. Like there's not like, yeah, everyone's against child trafficking. I mean, I guess except the child traffickers. But I mean, there's no like movement to fight back against it. And it's a lot more nuanced and hard to explain to people that like, yeah, I'm also against pedophilia and child trafficking, obviously. But this movement you're following and have fallen into, they say they're against it, but they're not doing anything. And in fact, the legit organizations that do the work have openly come out and say that what QAnon is doing is harmful to what they've been doing for years to actually stop these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's tricky because, like you just said, how do you explain that to someone why that would be bad? Because I mean, it's not objectively bad to say let's end child trafficking. That's obviously a good thing. But what comes out of the QAnon version of let's end child trafficking is something like the Wayfair conspiracy theory back in July when a popular QAnon influencer who's known as Amazing Polly, started tweeting about how she believed that Wayfair, the furniture company, was selling human children disguised as like curtains and for other furniture items. And this went extremely viral. I'm sure everyone watching has heard of this because even I saw it all over my Instagram and Facebook feeds of like people I went to college with, people I grew up with, because it was so sensational and seemed so easy to get behind. Oh, this furniture company is involved in human trafficking. No more Wayfair. And like there was no truth to it at all.
Right. Wayfair's big mistake was taking the product photos and forgetting to hide the tiny feet that were peeking out from the curtain.
I can't even joke about it. But,
I mean, it is. I mean, whenever I think of the Wayfair thing, it is honestly like it is the stupidest. I mean, and there's a lot of stupid things in QAnon. It is by far, I think, one of the stupidest aspects of it because there was no like, a lot of these things are crazy because there's some ridiculously convoluted explanation behind them all. The Wayfair thing was literally just, those boxes can't cost that much. There's children inside them.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting you say that because, first of all, they thought that they had more evidence than that because they were posting weird screenshots of like records of missing girls having the same names as those things, but also like something involving like, oh, like this number means that this was the date that the girl was taken or whatever, like very convoluted, like you said. And that's also how the whole Hunter Biden laptop conspiracy theory has spread, is through kind of such complicated and unclear rhetoric that basically nobody knows what they're actually saying. And therefore, people have a much easier time of denying the truth of this is all made up.
Right.
And, oh, well, and it's honest, it's the same thing is happening right now with the voter fraud conspiracy theories, like, which are also like largely spread by QAnon people. It's just kind of like, oh, well, look, this person took this USB drive from this computer in this video, and so that means that there was voter fraud. Everyone who knows anything about elections and voting systems knows that doesn't make any sense and that all of these claims are completely inaccurate. And, kind of the regular person sitting at home who voted for Trump doesn't know how voting works. And because why would you? Why would you need to know how the machine collects the votes? And so they're just believing what Trump is saying. And anyway, so it's basically all that is to say, yes, all of these far-right conspiracy theories have this in common of being intentionally convoluted to the point that you don't even know what they're talking about, and can just easily accept it as fact.
Right, right. And, if I recall, there was a news story, like a local news segment during during the Wayfair conspiracy, where one of the girls that they say was in one of those boxes who was child trafficked, they actually found her, the local news station, and they interviewed her, and she was like, I'm not being trafficked. I mean, I'm home now, but I ran away. Like, it wasn't even like, yeah, I mean, but that's actually the thing here. The stats they throw out of the millions of children who are stolen off the streets every year, that's not accurate. What most of these child trafficking cases are actually runaway kids or kids taken by a parent coming from out of like a divorced household, and the other parent calls the police saying, my husband or wife took my child, and I don't, can you track them for me? It's not like they're being stolen and sold into some like Eastern European sex slave community or something like that.
Right, and child trafficking does exist. Like, nobody has ever denied that, and like these organizations have existed for decades trying to effectively end child trafficking and end human trafficking, but it doesn't exist in the way that the QAnon community believes it does, because they are picturing this very specific kind of almost like movie version of what being kidnapped and sold into sex slavery looks like. They're picturing a girl walking home from school, and someone grabs her off the street, puts her in his car, and sells her off. And like, of course that has happened, right, in human history and in American history. Like, that is a scenario that has occurred, but that doesn't happen at large, and that's not what the reality of human trafficking is. And so by like focusing attention elsewhere, they're, as you said earlier, just distracting from the real work that these organizations are doing.
If that was happening in the numbers that they say, like, we're literally talking about thousands of people every day literally just being taken off the streets. It's a fantastical scenario, because it's just impossible for that incredible, like, insane thing to happen so many times each day.
Right. And I mean, to be fair, everything about QAnon is fantastical. I think it's a great word to use. Like, the idea that Hillary Clinton, I mean, I hate to bring up Frazzle Drip, the infamous video that doesn't exist, that QAnon people believe exists, that purports to show Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin wearing a child's face as a mask after like murdering the child.
I just happen to have that video on my hard drive. One sec. No, I mean, literally, like, here's something I want. Actually, I don't want to go ahead of myself. I'm gonna remember this for 1 second, and I want to ask you one more thing before we jump into the wellness yoga stuff. But I will come back to that Hillary video. That does not exist. Now I want to sort of set the stage here for the demographic we're talking about. And I honestly, when I bring it up, sometimes I wonder if people hear me say this and they're like, this guy's being sexist. But no, like, literally from the work, and there's been reports and studies done on this is legitimately the audience that is falling for this, in terms of when you jump from QAnon, the political conspiracy, to QAnon, the Save the Children conspiracy. This conspiracy that involves Save the Children, excuse me, seems to have been really effective at pulling in women between the ages of, like, I don't know, mid-20s to 40s or something like that, who, tend to be online, watch, Instagram influencers, like you mentioned. Like, it's a very particular demographic, and it's racking them in like hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. But I will add, like, women have always been involved with QAnon. It has never been a male-centric movement. I mean, other far right extremist groups like Proud Boys and the militia movements like 3%ers, Oath Keepers, like, those are absolutely male-centric, if not entirely male. Well, in the case of Proud Boys, entirely male groups. QAnon has always been kind of like welcome and open to kind of anyone, which is part of why it spread so easily to all these different kinds of demographics. And actually, like one of the first influencers to kind of pick up Q drops, which for those who don't know are the cryptic messages that the anonymous Q figure leaves on now 8kun, which Q purports to have high-level government security clearance. Anyway, one of the first few people to kind of like pick up those Q drops and present them to the world in like a YouTube video and posting on their blog and saying, "Hi, this is a thing we should look at," was a woman. And so, it has women have always been part of this story. But you're right that this new Save the Children kind of orientation of it, which Facebook has now banned the Save Our Children hashtag on Facebook and Instagram because they've identified that it's associated with QAnon. They have not yet banned Save the Children, which is interesting. But yes, it has largely like kind of been a recruitment tool for women, often of the demographic that you're saying, often white mothers, which is particularly because a lot of these like mommy influencers, mommy bloggers, were speaking about it in the spring. And because they were following those kinds of hashtags and kind of like fell into it. But I mean, there is still a huge swath of QAnon supporters that are like OG QAnon, you can call them, who are definitely still that like extremist. I think Trump is trying to destroy this cabal, etc. Which there are a lot of women in that group as well. But
Right. Well, folks, you heard it here from Rachel Greenspan. QAnon, a feminist movement.
Greenspan, you never heard me say that.
What's that?
You never heard me say that. I didn't say that.
No, it is that it's a really good observation. Actually, joking aside, that it does seem to have attracted. A lot of right-wing movements are male-dominated. Very rarely do you see women playing a major role, and if they do, they're like the token that they all hold up on a pedestal. Especially if you go back to like Gamergate. If there was a woman who supported the Gamergaters, then they treated her like she was like a. I mean, they literally called Christine Hoff Summers, I think her name is, because she was an older columnist who supported Gamergate. They called her based mom. They called her mommy because an older woman, supported them. So obviously they had to hold her as some sort of idol. And what else to call an older woman than mommy to these guys,
Yeah, I mean, I would also say like Gamergate in particular is based in sexism, so that is not surprising. But I mean, I think there's also something to be said for like the origin of QAnon is, I mean, someone could easily argue against me saying this. I'm saying right now, a huge origin of QAnon is hatred for Hillary Clinton, because Pizzagate kind of Pizzagate, which predated QAnon, kind of was the prerequisite for the interest in kind of this story, because the first Q drop was basically promising that Hillary was going to be arrested soon. And so it really started with this anti-Hillary sentiment, which, as we know, was very strong among white women. So it's no surprise that a lot of women are falling into this QAnon trap. I mean, and then there's also this whole aspect of QAnon, which is, I haven't done that much reporting on it thus far, but of QAnon kind of preying on people with mental illnesses, just because there are a lot of crimes and violent crimes, murders, attempted murders, and kidnappings and attempted kidnappings linked to QAnon supporters. And in many of those cases, people have been found to have mental illness, and at least one or two of the cases, I'll say one because I'm not positive it was more than one so far, were found not guilty by reason of insanity. And so I just think there is something to be said too for, I mean, who knows how much of this movement is being spread by people who are just like being preyed upon because they're kind of susceptible to believing in this kind of conspiratorial thinking.
Right. It really is in many aspects, and on this show we also cover a lot of white supremacist and far right movements, and it really is sort of the same dynamic in terms of you have your what I call the true believers, the ones who were in on the grift. They have something to gain out of it. They got money coming in, or general care for all the attention they're seeking, and they're getting it, so they have that to go for. They're going for them, and then you have the people who are being duped. And obviously, if you can possibly, depending on how deep they're in, you could possibly save those people who are being duped from whatever whatever rabbit hole they've fallen down. But those true believers, they're in on it. They want to. They are purposely spreading the lies and the deceit and the hatred, because they got something to gain. And
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So you just referred to those people as the true believers, but I'm sure some of them are true believers, but some of them are, as you said, just in it for the grift and know, they know that this is fake. Particularly, the people who are behind Q know that, I mean, they fabricated this whole thing. And I mean, we don't need to get into this now, but people believe that Jim Watkins, the owner of 8kun, former owner of 8chan, is Q, which is like something that all extremism reporters have been covering. I mean, there's a lot of evidence pointing to that, but that point being, if it is him, like, this dude has zero government clearance. Like, he's a pig farmer in the Philippines. And
well, that's what the government wants you to think.
Well, I mean, that's a big question, is if and when it comes out that Jim Watkins or some other person with zero government connection is Q, do QAnon believers, like you just said, make up some reason, to believe that that's a lie? Either that the person is lying and they're not actually Q, or that Trump is trying to protect them by pretending that they're not in connection to the government? Or will it all end because Trump, like, I think it only can end, I'm now jumping ahead very far, but QAnon can only end, I think, if and when Trump says, I swear to God, this was all fake, which he won't do ever. And so
I actually disagree. I think there's no end to this, because that will be easily manipulated into, well, Trump is obviously trying to hint at us that he has to do this. He has to get the non-believers off the trail of QAnon so that he could continue his work. So he's putting us down. He's detaching from us simply because it's the game he's got to play. There's everything is secret code to them. No matter what's being said, they will contort it to mean what they would like it to mean. And that's sort of I mean, I had I forgot, I'm having a mental block in terms of her name, but I had a academic on this show who basically compared the Tea Party to QAnon. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to see, and this is, not really, we're going to get really into the wellness and yoga stuff right now, but what we're going to see is basically almost the exact thing we saw in like 2010 during the midterms in 2010, where the Tea Party took over the Republican Party. And I don't know if it'll be the same dynamic, because QAnon is a little bit easier for the mainstream who aren't believers to detach from, in terms of, like, you could sell, even though it's bullshit, you could sell that Tea Party was about taxes. It wasn't. But there's nothing, like, there's no facade for QAnon. It is what it is. Right. So how successful they are doing that, we'll see. But that's what they're going to try to do. It's going to, I mean, we already see it with Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia. Right. We're going to have, and also her name, Boebert in Colorado.
Well, I was just going to say, it's interesting because now we have these two Congress people who have espoused QAnon in the past, or Congresswomen-elect, rather. And I haven't spoken to Marjorie myself, but she has said that she, doesn't believe in QAnon. And Lauren Boebert's team emailed me back for a comment for a story, which I don't think I've actually used yet. So exclusive here for you right now. They said that she does not believe in QAnon. And so I think, yeah.
Breaking news.
Yeah, breaking news. I believe that she said that before to other reporters. But the fact that kind of the two QAnon candidates made it into Congress and are both trying to distance themselves from QAnon is really interesting, and I think says a lot about the future of QAnon in politics. I mean, to be fair, there are also, I think, 5 state legislators across country who believe in QAnon who won in this election. So it's definitely an issue in local politics as well. But I think the fact that Boebert and Green are trying to distance themselves might say a lot about the future of QAnon in politics.
Right, but at the same time, they're espousing the same conspiracy theories, just not under the QAnon banner.
Right. It's
So
like
right. So
longer.
let's now jump right into some of these yoga and wellness influencers that you spoke to. Now, it is really fascinating how much it's grown in these communities. Can you tell us a little bit about, if you are someone logging into your Instagram, you do yoga, or you're into like wellness and alternative. I'm actually, honestly, this is where I tap out because I know nothing about these worlds.
Okay.
So this is, so explain, like, what are people seeing, and who are some of the major influencers in that world who are spreading the QAnon conspiracies?
So first off, it's important to say that like most of these women are what we consider micro influencers, meaning they have like fewer than 50,000 followers. So they're not anyone that like you would have ever heard of. And they're not people who like I would have heard of before reporting on this, because I'm not a.
The interesting aspect about that, I'm really glad you brought this up. I actually think that helps them, because a lot of brands, from my understanding, go to micro influencers because their audience is more targeted, and their audience feels like they know the person because that person actually takes the time to comment towards them, and to the point where if they say something, it's more like, oh, I'm talking to a friend, so I'll believe it because I trust them. They have integrity to me because I feel like I know them, as opposed to like, if they see Kylie Jenner or some huge celebrity influencer say the same thing who they have no connection to.
Yes, absolutely. So micro influencers can often make like huge amounts of money that can be comparable to someone with like 500,000 followers if they have good management team and good sponsorships, because when you have a small following, you can have really good engagement numbers, and Instagram, Instagram specific, since that's mostly what we're talking about here. Instagram sponsorships are like all based on your engagement. So like, are people liking your posts? Are they commenting? Are they sharing with friends? Are they responding to your stories? That kind of engagement is really what it is. And like you just explained, when you have a smaller following, you feel very connected to those people. And also in part because they have a smaller following, they can directly engage with more of their followers, so they can like respond to their DMs, where like Kylie Jenner would never respond to a random DM. She probably has her DMs closed. I mean, she's a bad example because she's not really an influencer, but no
My
offense.
bad.
No
My
offense.
bad.
Oh my God, no offense. I just because I name checked her again as well. But anyway, so these women are. I mean, it depends on like the day, but yoga specific, these yoga influencers, like if you go to their profile, it's mostly pictures of them doing yoga poses, or meditating or journaling, or like a picture of a journal with like some kind of like spiritual quote, like, sun is on my side today, something like that, kind of like meditating on and reflecting on their day. And it's all like very like light and like all about like being spiritual, obviously, because that's like what yoga is all about. And so that's everything I just said is like totally kind of the norm in this world, and like has been for years. Like people who are yoga professionals have Instagram accounts, and that's the kind of stuff that they post. And they might even post like yoga workouts, especially during COVID. But now you'll find a lot of those same posts, but with captions that kind of hint, wink, wink to QAnon. And so in the caption, it will be talking all about kind of like feeling the light within you and defeating the darkness. But they'll say like the satanic something, like they're using these buzzwords from the QAnon world, and they'll often especially use the concept of the Great Awakening, which is kind of taken from the Enlightenment side of yoga, but is like kind of a huge slogan in QAnon, of kind of like, we're all going to one day be woken up, which,
Right.
What does that sound like? Jesus. But that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, so these yoga people are using all of those kinds of phrases, and often they're also sharing some videos. For example, the Plandemic documentary 2-part video, which was actually made by Miki Willis, who's a filmmaker in LA, who's like huge in the yoga circles, mostly in LA. And so that Plandemic documentary, which came out in May, kind of like highlighted this whole anti-vax, anti-Western medicine sentiment, which is like honestly more so than the Save the Children thing. It's the anti-vax, anti-mask kind of mindset that's brought these yogis into the world.
I completely, I completely agree. I feel like that's the. I know we were talking before about the pandemic, and obviously the pandemic is what was what kickstarted the anti-vaxxer connection to connect the QAnon side with the wellness and alternative medicine world. But the anti-vaccination thing, I think, is the actual guiding light, the thing that's connecting both worlds into forming this one huge conspiratorial mass. Pretty much, it's really interesting to see, especially when people know that the anti-vaxxers are probably one of the main communities that experts have been really harping on social media platforms to do something about, like more so than any other conspiratorial subgenre. Like the anti-vaxxers, or what I've been hearing about them for many years in terms of how dangerous they are, and they are what caused what we're seeing right now. It's just like they were like just right there in the middle as QAnon and the wellness pandemic cohorts sort of just mashed together with the anti-vaxxers holding them in like this one, it's just, that's it right there, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and a lot of people, when I wrote this story, which I would love to say I co-wrote the story with my colleague Gabby Landsberg, who writes about health and fitness and wellness. So we co-wrote the story together, and a lot of people, even internally, like at our newsroom, were so shocked by this story, by the fact that people who love yoga, which is often associated in pop culture with like left-leaning ideologies, would be espousing this extremely far-right conspiracy theory. But as we just spoke about, the anti-vax sentiment is so strong in the yoga community, and anti-vax is something that bridges conservatives and liberals a lot, especially in the wellness world in particular. And so it's not surprising at all to me that even if these people aren't kind of directly supportive of Trump, they're excited to latch on to this thing that's kind of like giving them something to latch onto in the darkness of this time, but also they agree with the concept that we shouldn't be forced to wear masks, and that they don't believe the virus is real, and they want us to take all these kind of snake oil salesman-esque precautions that don't actually work. And so it was kind of just that confluence of factors that made these yoga people like perfectly primed to start spreading QAnon. And I should mention that I believe all of these women who we reached out to for the story, who have these micro influencer platforms, pretty much all of them said, "Oh, like, thanks for reaching out. I'm actually not a QAnon believer, though." And so, like, these are people who are literally using QAnon slogans like the Great Awakening and using terms satanic cabal and posting videos that are made by these anti-mask QAnon people. But they're saying, "Oh, I don't actually identify with that." And so that's really interesting too. And that's not what I found in my reporting in the spring with the kind of lifestyle fashion mommy bloggers who their connection to QAnon was 100% this anti-trafficking thing. They all were very proud of their QAnon beliefs and like had the "where we go one, we go all" in their bios, and had, QAnon paraphernalia. And like one of those women said to me, "I believe it's my duty," I'm paraphrasing now, she said, "I believe it's my duty to be a voice for my followers in this time," or something along those lines. That was her response to like, "Why are you spreading QAnon to your, however many thousands of followers?" And, then now it's like a adjacent influencer community, if you will, or these yoga people who aren't necessarily like vocal that it's QAnon because they're not necessarily pro-Trump at all. It's very disjointed from and disconnected from this Trump's going to defeat the cabal ideology and more focused on like there is a cabal.
Right, right. Now, who would you say is the biggest of these QAnon wellness yoga influencers?
That's a tough question. I would say, I mean, definitely not the biggest, and I don't have everyone's like follower counts up in front of me, so I don't want to.
Oh, no, I mean just basically like who is probably one of the more prominent names. Like, they don't need to have the follower count, but if they, if they say something, and I guess they would disagree with me saying QAnon, but like you just said, but who is like one of the more prominent people who have been really like steadfast in their support for a lot of these things that QAnon also espouses.
Right. So so in terms of general, this whole wellness and yoga world, this one woman named Crystal Tini is very like proud pro-Trump, pro-QAnon, and very much kind of enmeshed in this yoga and wellness community. And she has been also a huge voice of anti-mask sentiment as early as like April, I believe, was posting about that on her Instagram. And then there's this woman, Stephanie Birch. There's another woman named Busy Gold. They both have above 50,000 followers. And those two are, claiming that they're not involved with QAnon, but they are, like we just spoke about, kind of spreading those slogans and all of that. And I also should say, like, those two women and all of the other yoga QAnon influencers that we wrote about in this piece, I think all of them were on this list made by this podcast called Conspirituality, which traces the rise of QAnon in the yoga and wellness world. And so that was started by people from the community who want to put an end to kind of QAnon spreading there. And so they have a lot of great information of kind of all of these different people and the levels of QAnon that they're spreading. Are they saying where we go, when we go all, or are they just saying like, let's defeat this satanic cabal?
Now, when they post where we go one, we go all, and then they say QAnon, why do you think I support that? Now, do you get the feeling that they are being truthful? Like they really don't understand what the hashtag, what that slogan means? Or do you think that they are supportive of it very directly and they know what QAnon means, but they just don't want the problems that come along with being connected to it?
To be completely honest, I think most of these people, with the exception of like a small few, these people being women in the wellness, lifestyle, yoga influencer space, most of them I think don't really understand the severity and extremism of QAnon. They're not reading Akun chats. They're not on like Parler hashtags reading about QAnon. They're not in Gab groups talking about their theories. They're like literally just on Instagram talking to each other basically. And so I think they just are, and this is just my perception. This is not what they have told me directly. So just my personal interpretation is that they believe in some of these things. They believe in a lot of these pieces of it and are talking about it. And I don't think that there's necessarily that much more there. Like, I don't think that they're trying to be secretive necessarily. And I think also a huge part of it is they probably, any influencer knows that anything they say that's remotely political is going to lose them a crazy amount of followers.
Now, with that said, actually, this is the perfect segue for what I kept on the side here, and I'm going to pull it back out now. You had mentioned in your article that there was some sharing of like some anti-Hillary Clinton stuff by some of these influencers, correct? How do they square that with not being involved with the political side or not being QAnon, involved, and it's just about saving the children? How do they fit the Hillary stuff into all that?
I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I bet there are a lot of people who still hate Hillary Clinton and a lot of Trump supporters who still believe these Hillary conspiracy theories, but don't necessarily, talk about QAnon or care about QAnon. Like the thing with QAnon is that it like has all these vectors that kind of spread in different ways. And, you know, one of the main demographics are these women who are often like looking online, and I think that a lot of them are just coming upon this content kind of unsuspecting and not necessarily. And like, I mean, that's how misinformation largely spreads. Is you see a post, you think it's interesting, and you share it, and you don't know if it's accurate. And so I think that's like, I know that that's playing a huge role here. Is in just this, oh, interesting, I hate Hillary too, let me share this, or oh, that's crazy, Trump actually won the election, I'm going to share this post too. And it's just kind of, as you said earlier, a rabbit hole, which often does kind of radicalize people towards the far right and often does introduce people to QAnon at large. But some people might just be sharing little posts here and there. So
now, did you get a sense from any of these influencers you covered that they believe the aspect of QAnon that states that Trump is actually doing something to save the children and stop child trafficking?
So for this specific yoga article, I didn't get to speak at length with any of these people. They just sent responses, I think all of them. But for the story that I wrote in the spring, the wellness and lifestyle bloggers, a couple of those women absolutely did believe Trump was like doing something. And again, it goes back to the whole convoluted nature of it all. I don't think anyone who believes in Trump trying to defeat this cabal could actually explain to you what Trump is doing. And they just think that he is.
Well, that's because it's Q level information, Rachel. We're not privy to it.
Exactly. No, but I know, like, you're kidding, but that's exactly what it is, because Q is anonymous. They'll believe anything, and they'll twist everything, like you said, into making it kind of fit into this narrative, which is what we're seeing now with the voter fraud claims. Like, Trump lost the election, but they found a way to continue this kind of charade, not largely led, just 100% led by Trump, to claim that he actually didn't lose and that it was rigged and he's the victim and everyone's out to get him. And he knows what he's doing, and that kind of positioning himself as the victim in any scenario kind of emboldens these QAnon people to say, people are out to get Trump, we have to save him.
So. How prominent is, well, before I get to this, let me just ask you really quick. Did you get a sense that these wellness bloggers who believe that Trump is actually doing what QAnon says he's doing, which he's not, did you get a sense that these people were not Trump supporters before, and QAnon has made them believe that Trump is actually doing this good? Or was there any sort of feeling of that from them? Like it'd just be interesting to know if QAnon actually changed the minds of how these non-political actors feel about Trump.
That's a great question. I don't have a great answer for you because I haven't done enough research on this, but I will say that there are a lot of people who were never adamant Trump supporters before who have discovered QAnon, and so a lot of QAnon's support hasn't come from people who are always going to MAGA rallies. Like, a lot of people are going to MAGA rallies because they love QAnon, which is like a very important and interesting distinction, and also furthers what you believe, that QAnon will never go away. So because it appears to be bringing people into the fold who shouldn't have been there in the first place. And also there's a lot of evidence that there are Democrats who believe in QAnon. I mean, there are, and again, because QAnon is so malleable and people kind of believe different versions of it and kind of follow whatever pieces of it fits their life, which, on it, to be fair, like that's how religion works. I mean, not every person who is Catholic doesn't eat meat on Fridays or whatever that is. I'm not Catholic, so I don't know exactly what that policy is. But people kind of pick and choose what works with them, what they believe in, what they want to kind of adhere to. And that's how QAnon works. People choose kind of what level of QAnon they're going to engage with. And it kind of just keeps trickling down. And like we were saying before, a lot of these Republican officials are just like spreading these laundered QAnon theories that have like gone down the QAnon ladder, until they come out the other side and just kind of become this other version of what they are.
Now, the adrenochrome part of QAnon feels like it's tailor made for the alternative medicine world.
Absolutely.
I think, if I recall in the intro, I alluded to it with the baby blood drinking, which isn't entirely accurate, but it's the easiest way to explain it without getting too into it. But really quick, I guess, how much do they talk about the adrenochrome conspiracy portion of QAnon?
We did identify at least one such influencer who has mentioned adrenochrome on her profile. And yeah, I mean, it's for the viewers who don't listen / listeners who don't know, adrenochrome is kind of this huge piece of QAnon lore that says that Democrats and celebrities and elites consume this. I'm not explaining it well at all. Consume something from children's adrenal glands that people secrete when they
It's
are
like the fountain of youth for them.
Right. And so they drink it to keep alive, which, if anyone's familiar with anti-Semitic blood libel conspiracy theories from centuries ago, it's kind of the same thing,
Right.
Alleging that evil people are consuming the kind of
baby parts.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so the thing with adrenochrome is like, you're right, it's like kind of perfectly primed for anti-Western medicine, kind of alternative medicine people to believe in, because they're already there's already kind of this whole aspect of them being primed to believe in kind of this more conspiratorial thinking. Because if you're a person who doesn't believe that we should be vaccinated, there's a reason for that, and a lot of people, there's a lot of different reasons why people would believe that, and there's a lot of reasons for why someone doesn't want to vaccinate their kids, etc. But kind of one line of thinking there is like, which is often adopted by these yoga people, is I don't want kind of this foreign substance entering my body. And so it's all about kind of like the natural body and the natural order of humanity, et cetera. And so, the idea that there's this substance that humans secrete that people can consume kind of does make sense, that it would be appealing to people who already are primed to kind of like be very focused on like the human body in this kind of alternative way.
Now, what has the wellness world done in response to? Because I've seen it, and it'd be really interested in hearing just what the dynamics are in terms of just who's on what side, and what side seems to be more popular in terms of are people. Are these people in the wellness world, are they considered on the fringe, or like is there a blowback from the wellness world where they're seeing this happen and seeing some of their friends and people that they look up to even for health advice and fitness guru types? Are they doing something to sort of fight back against this conspiracy theory that seems to be taking over in these communities?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that QAnon is still largely on kind of the fringe of the yoga world, but it's on the fringe, but it's still, if I'm a person who follows 300 yoga professionals on Instagram, I'm going to see QAnon stuff on my feed. Like if you're in that world, you're going to see some of that content. And so there actually has been like huge pushback against that from the community. Like I mentioned earlier, this whole podcast, Conspirituality, dedicated to exploring this connection and exploring the rise of this extremist movement within the wellness world. And they have this website where they essentially like name every single influencer and every single yoga professional in LA and other cities where yoga is huge, and kind of, say like, these are people who are espousing QAnon. And there's also was this letter circulated on Instagram in September that was basically a statement in opposition to QAnon. And it was created by people who are huge in the yoga community. Susanna Barkataki, the Wanderlust Festival co-founder, Jeff Krasno, and some other yoga influential people spread this message to kind of say, like, we will not stand for this, and this needs to end, and we don't want this in our community.
Now, I can't believe I forgot to make the call for questions earlier, but we did get a good question. And if you're watching right now, youtube.com/Matt Binder, you could jump in. I'll see super chats. So if you want to drop a super chat with a question, I'll get to it right away if there's time. But user Vinny Holiday with a YouTube super chat question. Vinny asks, and you might not know this, but I do know there's overlap in the world. So in these worlds, so it'd be interesting to see if you came across any of this. Vinny asks, how does this overlap with the online MMA community? Now, I know a lot of mixed martial artists are really into wellness, obviously, because they care about, whatever they could do to, peak performance for their fights. And that includes, alternative medicine. Did you come across anything with that overlapped with the MMA world?
Yeah, so that's a great question. First of all, it's 100% true. There are several MMA fighters who are huge QAnon believers. However, as far as my reporting goes, I don't see a huge link between the MMA community espousing QAnon and the yoga community. I think they've found it through separate channels.
Right.
And, all of these different groups that discover QAnon, it's like kind of top down. And so, one MMA fighter sees another big MMA fighter posting about QAnon, they're going to start believing in it, which is, that's how this works. And so I don't see any evidence that kind of these two communities were linked in that, but they absolutely at this kind of the same time period, the last kind of like 6 to 10 months, we saw QAnon grow there. Absolutely.
Right. It does seem like the MMA people who got into QAnon got into it because of their politics.
Yeah.
Right. Now, before we went live on the show, we were talking really quick, and you had brought up something really interesting about a radio interview you did, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know we went way over what I told you. Do you still have a few minutes?
Absolutely. I have no plans until there's a vaccine. So
perfect. Oh, good. So we'll just. Do you mind just going until there is one? I mean, we could just a complete marathon. So you had mentioned you did a radio interview to discuss this, and that they took questions. And what you said were first of all, the questions you were being asked, and who was asking you these questions, really fascinating to me. And I know we don't have time really to go into a deep dive of this aspect of QAnon, but I can't let you go without at least touching on it. Can you explain what I'm talking about to the audience?
Absolutely. So I was telling Matt about this because it was one of the last live interviews I did, was Minnesota Public Radio a few weeks ago talking about QAnon, and they had questions from listeners. And we had several questions actually from pastors and church leaders in Minnesota listening, who called in to say kind of, some of them just called in to say, like, a lot of people in my church are spreading QAnon and it's hard to know how to help them, basically. But then some were saying kind of like, it makes sense because, as we spoke about earlier here, like QAnon is kind of this religious slant to it. Some people call it a cult, some people call it a religion, some people call it a movement, it's a whole thing. But so it was just interesting. A lot of religious leaders from kind of like rural Minnesota were listening to public radio and calling in and talking about their experience with QAnon, and how kind of one person made this really interesting point of, in Christianity, if the belief is that Jesus is going to rise from the dead, how can they tell, their parisher that kind of, the QAnon theories are outlandish if like their religion is based on this idea that Jesus is going to rise up from the dead. And so that was really interesting. And what I said in my response to that listener was, this is not Jesus or the Bible. This is a random dude writing on an anonymous chat room in the year 2020. So, but I think that's a really valid point. And like, I think also something that gets lost in these conversations is like, we believe in a lot of crazy shit as humans, like we do. And what's crazy to one person isn't crazy to another. But the QAnon issue is that it's like extremely dangerous. And as the FBI has said, poses a domestic terrorism threat. And so unfortunately, we can't just let it be. It can't just become this kind of new religion. It can't be that way.
Right. I mean, I really do think that is fascinating that you had pastors call in to ask questions, because I've heard every aspect of QAnon in terms of which communities it's spreading into now, and I've had episodes on this show about specifically focusing on how Operation Underground Railroad was, that charity that's QAnon adjacent had basically teamed up with a WWE referee to basically convert a bunch of WWE wrestlers into QAnon believers. I've talked about, we're doing the show on the wellness community. I've had shows about the pandemic, like I said, about QAnon. And the idea that there are, churches grappling with this, it didn't even occur to me that they would try, honestly. Like, I mean, obviously there are progressive churches, but usually I guess we think of church as a more conservative place that maybe wouldn't even want to even, touch on this. They would just go about ignoring it, if at most. So the fact that you had people asking you about how to deal with it from a religious perspective, I mean, that is the sort of key. And I know, my friend Michael Brooks, before he passed away, one of the things he was really harping on in terms of not just, QAnon and conspiracy theories, but just as a whole, was that the right has sort of completely co-opted like the idea of combining their ideological beliefs with like a religion, with like a faith, with like a betterment. So a way, there's a reason why someone like Jordan Peterson writing rules for men to clean up their room blows up on the right, because they've cultivated that sort of thing, whereas the left doesn't really have that. And without someone, on the left or even left-leaning, the Democratic Party even, to sort of combat that aspect of the far right, I really do think that's how they're able to push all this stuff. There's no equivalent that actually speaks truth to power to take on QAnon. We have people who debunk this stuff, but there's no one to provide, that emptiness in people's lives that draw them to conspiracy theories. There's nothing on the other side that tries to fill that emptiness for people looking for something.
Right. And I mean, and it's also worth mentioning that like the most popular conspiracy theories before QAnon are ones that have existed for decades, like Area 51, Paul McCartney is dead, moon landing was faked. These are the world is flat. Flat earthers still exist. Like all of these conspiracy theories still have people who believe in them. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. There is no simple answer for how to deal with QAnon, but I think the fact that religious leaders are grappling with it makes a lot of sense, because you go to your religious leader for guidance in every single way. And so if you're a religious person who finds QAnon, that's going to be confusing, because you're going to need to talk to your pastor or your priest or whomever it is about that. And so I think it is actually really important. I think religious leaders, and there is actually, a movement among within Christian and Catholic and other sects leadership to kind of try and figure out how to squash this, because they have more power than kind of this random anonymous person on the internet does.
Right. I mean, it's also a threat to their whole. I mean, the whole idea of the church, no matter what denomination you're part of. I mean, if someone online is providing something that your church and your faith hasn't provided to these people, right. I mean, there's a real problem there. And I mean, I'm not saying directly that there's an issue with what they're doing, but people are feeling very lost right now, and they're going to whatever gives them the comfort. And unfortunately, this conspiracy, QAnon, basically, when it comes down to it, you can take this Q's drops and basically transform it into anything because they're so vague. I mean, maybe that's the problem with the Bible. It's too, they give too much away. Maybe they should have left some room for the imagination.
Well, before we go, I would like to say that there are always Bible verses involved in Q drops. And so, like, Q, whomever he, she, they are, knows that they have this huge following of devout Christians, and they're using that to their advantage. And also, like, if you go to the social media profiles of the top QAnon people, they'll randomly be posting like Bible verses or like images of Jesus. Like, a lot of these people are very religious, including Jim Watkins, who runs 8kun. So there's a huge religious overlap there.
Right. I mean, the whole thing is, everything of it is seeped in sort of this religious, rhetoric. But it's, I don't know where it goes. I think with the, obviously I think we're about to see another wave. I mean, here we really never ended a wave of the pandemic, but it's about to spike even worse all across the country, which is undoubtedly going to lead to stronger lockdown measures in certain parts of the country, which is undoubtedly going to be give more prime meat to the QAnon audience, because you're going to have a whole new group of people sitting home, nothing to do, going online, finding new conspiracy theories, mostly probably from QAnon. And, if they haven't already come across QAnon, odds are they'll come across it this time. So, it's... What do we do, Rachel? I mean, there's no answer,
It's bleak.
That's why this show is called Doomed.
It is distressing. But every day there are more stories about people leaving the QAnon movement, and so perhaps that's somewhere we can offer some light and some hope here. People are kind of, slowly but surely realizing that this is a con, and they're finding their way out of it. So we can only hope that kind of more people follow those footsteps.
Right. That's a good way to end this on a bright note. Even though I have to say, unfortunately, I disagree that the numbers are evening out. I think, for every one they lose, they gain two. But
no. To clarify, they're not. It's not even. It's like not evening out at all. I'm just saying that it does. There are people who are leaving,
right?
And so hopefully there will be kind of some mass migration,
right?
And we'll see.
You could just say it, Rachel. Thanks a lot, Matt, for ending on a bummer when I was trying really hard to make people feel hopeful.
We just feel doomed.
Rachel Greenspan, digital culture reporter at Insider. I have linked your piece on the in the YouTube description and on the Patreon announcement of the show. I want to give you a second here, or as many seconds as you'd like, to plug whatever you'd like, Twitter handle, upcoming article, whatever. Feel free.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been super fun. Check out my story that Matt linked, and you can click there to see all my other stories on insider.com. I write about extremism and misinformation and conspiracy theories, but also other social media news that interests me. So there's kind of an eclectic mix there, and you can follow me on Twitter at Rach_Greenspan. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me tonight, Rachel. Have a great night.
You too. Bye, Matt.
Bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it is worth, actually, and I've been planning this out. I don't know if it'll be the next episode, but I've been reaching out to some people. I think it's worth going through all the different communities that QAnon is sort of seeping into. Like I mentioned, we did the pandemic, we did like the anti-maskers, and we touched on the anti-vaxxers in pretty much every episode. We did the WWE. I got MMA on the docket because it's a different audience and it's definitely worth hitting. We touched on it here. We just hit the wellness and the yoga communities. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention, even Marianne Williamson, former Democratic primary candidate for president, And obviously, you all know her as being one of these, wellness, alternative medicine type, spiritual leader type people. She's come out, and I should reach out to her. She's come out to warn her circles in these communities, to not fall for QAnon. I got to reach out to her. That's a great idea. I'm going to make a note of that. Also, I believe during the program, I think the Surfs, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Surfs raided my Twitch channel. And, I don't usually focus on Twitch. I might have to if everyone who, if every leftist is now just on Twitch and going to send raids over to me, might have to, hey, Twitch audience, thanks for sticking around and watching this feed. I saw you. Don't worry. I see you. And, yeah, I appreciate it. Follow me on there. Also, youtube.com/MattBinder. Subscribe to me there on YouTube. Follow me on Twitch as well, twitch.tv/MattBinder. Wherever on social media, really. Just search Matt Binder and I'll come up. Twitter, I'm at Matt Binder. Instagram, I'm at Matt Binder. But, yeah. And also, patreon.com/MattBinder. If you could support this show, I ask for only $5, but you can give less. Or you can give more, totally up to you. I always want to say this. If you cannot afford to financially support this show, please don't. I totally get it. Times are tough. We're living through a pandemic. Support the show by just subscribing to me everywhere on social media and letting all your friends and followers know that you like my show and that they should listen to it too. If you like my show and they should listen to it, that they should listen to it too. Don't tell them if you hate the show. I'm not asking for you to lie. Also, you can support this show by going to doomedpod.com just doomedpod.com. That's it. There's iTunes links, Google Play links. You can leave a review on iTunes to support this show as well without donating a single dime to me. If you want to give a one-off, just jump in the YouTube chat right now and drop a super chat, and I'll read your comment or question if you want to add one to your super chat donation. But back to the patrons, I should say. I want to name the people who joined since the last show because I've started doing that now. We've got, I'm not sure if I mentioned this person, so I'll name them one more time. Aram I, thank you for joining the Patreon, becoming a patron. Choice Fantastic, thank you for becoming a patron. Daniel S, thank you for becoming a patron. And Austin C, really appreciate all of you becoming a patron over this past week, especially when people, I don't know, it's the holidays are coming. I know money's tight. We actually lost a few patrons at the beginning of the month, and I hope they're doing okay because unlike, we lost a few patrons because, times are tough. I guess I hope everyone's okay. I'd honestly much prefer hearing that people left my show because they hate me than having to, then unfortunately someone having to quit the show because, financial burden. I hope everyone's doing as well as they can, and the show will trek on and give you guys as much content as it can. But if you can't support the show financially, do it. Patreon.com/MattBinder. Help the people out who can't. Because the show will grow with the Patreon subscribers. And on that note, we're going to jump into the second half of the show. Stick around. Just give me a minute here to get the Skype, show Skype. Just give me a second to log into the show Skype username. And that way you guys can call in. We've been getting callers every week now, which has been great. So I'm going to log into that show Skype right now, which is search Doomed Live. I think the actual username is DoomedLive_1. I hate that Skype automatically gave that to me. I'll be changing it, even if it means having to start a new account. But for now, search Doomed Live. Call me there. To everyone dropping out right now, to the freebie listeners, to those who aren't watching live, see you all next time. Undoomed. All right, we are back. If you'd like to call into the show, Doomed Live. Oh, looks like I just missed someone. Feel free to call in, Doomed Live. Oh, here we go. Is this my favorite regular? Well, I have a number of favorite regulars. Can't give you that much credit, Renee.
Yeah,
But is this Renee?
The cross that you have to bear.
Always a pleasure when you call in, though, Renee. I just don't want to make anyone else feel
Right.
left out by calling you with a favor.
No, but
you know?
I mean, actually, I'm like being serious. I mean, and also congratulate you on the coverage. I'm gonna turn off my. Wait a minute. Yeah, but
Ooh, I just hit you twice there. I'm sorry, buddy.
yeah. Wait, just let me.
Always a pleasure when you call in.
Ooh,
Yeah.
ooh.
I just disconnected the HDMI. It's like. Right. So actually, I'm calling. I mean, I wanted to congratulate you on the coverage on Peru, of course,
Why,
and
thank you.
especially since it's so significant for this side of the world, the global South, and all of that. Then the other thing is like I've encountered this like there's like a kind of like a anti-vaxxer skepticism on the left or disguised as the left, as I was telling you about this whole like brouhaha
Well, yeah,
regarding
the whole anti-vaxxer movement really was seeped into like, I don't want to say far left because that's not accurate. I want to say fringe left.
Okay.
The conspiratorial left, like which really does it's a range here. Everyone from like your generic liberal moms living in Manhattan who don't want to vaccinate their kids because they think they'll give them autism, to the people who just won't do what the state tells me. Well, I don't want to get a vaccine because I have to. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like
Yeah, but I mean in the global South, there's the other kind of a thing is that our suspicion towards you guys. I mean the suspicion towards the North. And obviously the pharmaceutical companies and all that, and this, especially in this situation where there's a sort of like a kind of gold rush to find a COVID cure, shall we say, and
right.
whether or not it's effective or not. And there's also like also within testing, as you know, there's a process or processes where there's a sort of like in order to establish like a control in the testing, they're given like actually a placebo that has no effect, and that kind of like it's like sort of like taking a risk, shall we say.
Right. I mean,
And
so basically, what you're saying is that the anti-vaxxer sentiment in, well, at least Chile. I don't know if you're talking about South America broader.
well, I was talking the main thrust of it actually is centered in Argentina. Now, regards to Chile, before to sort of like introduce this, basically what there is that basically this is sort of like a kind of a very like commercialized, and it's very like Wild West, and nobody's going to take the COVID vaccine until it's intensely tested and all that. There's other issues that whether or not because of the economic disparity is it going to be available at the same price, and whether or not there'll be the old feudal tendencies of giving it to the haves and not to the have-nots, and whether or not that's practical in these terms if we're talking about a rampant virus that can be like passed on to other people and can mutate and what have you, even though the effectiveness of the 95% of the effectiveness of the vaccine. Now in Argentina is a special case because I've said it before to many people, and Argentinians especially. For instance, there's a guy that visits MR that's called what's his name, Juan Gomez, that would really would negate this, would say I'm completely off my head, I'm completely mistaken. But I consider like Argentina one of the most successful success stories regarding fascism, because they internalized like the whole Domingo Perón. Juan Gomez calls this like nationalism, but shall we say the idea, the national toxic nationalism that goes on, the mythos of the national identity, and at the same time economic policies regarding nationalizing industries, and to the extreme of like they accept like foreign companies, but they have to have the production in-house within Argentina. But this at the same time creates a kind of sort of like distrust of anything that comes from the English-speaking world. Of course, after the war, with the Falklands War, which they still feel and all that.
Can I actually ask you that? Let's rewind back a little bit, because I know QAnon is spreading globally, and it's obviously come
right.
up.
I mean, in this case, if you want to say like regarding Chile, there's like a few people that use like They're still there, of course, because of the influence of Nazism and all that, because of the refugees and all that. There's a sort of like a kind of like anti-Semitism. There's like something that predates QAnon, because like the inventor of or shall we say the ideologue of Herzl, of Zionism, postulated like before Israel that the occupation of Patagonia as a possible like homeland for the Jews, for the Jewish diaspora, especially the Ashkenazi. So there's still like appears, rears its ugly head that all these like Israeli tourists that kind of like are sort of like of course like imbued with their own nationalism, kind of treat the Patagonia when they go backpacking as they're kind of like a garbage bin, and kind of like abuse like their sense of like superiority or something. They're like very rude, and some people extrapolate this like this fascist idea that these Israelis are scouting out to use like to once again the possibility of Patagonia being a sort of a new homeland instead of Israel. But at the same time, that goes with also for instance, within Patagonia, the Mapuche like distrust of the outsider and all that. I've had like those difficulties. Within Argentina, for instance, I had a discussion with a prestigious Argentinian illustrator who'd worked with Disney, but at the same time had no interest in like in English-speaking media, though he had like the influence of English-speaking media, but it had to be like through European and other sources like tied to Argentina, like French, Italian, of course, and Spanish, and that has to do with also with European. There's like the European like anti-COVID kind of thing that could be tied with because I've even in a Spanish Antifa page, they were like talking about these restrictions and all that. Now I can understand that, and you can understand that that perhaps this is being used as perhaps as social control in certain instances. At the same time, there is a need for social control if due to the widespread of a disease such as this, of a virus. And at the same time, there's like this clumsy kind of like trying to appeal to the marketplace, to the free market of trying to establish like businesses, especially restaurants and what have you. And then when the winter like second wave hits, that they have to like dial back all of that, and all the and naturally everybody's like used to like these certain like easing out of freedoms and things like that, and that creates like a backlash.
Right.
And yeah, and arguing with this guy to keep it like super simple, where QAnon reared its easy head, he started like mentioning like George Soros and all that shite. Like he was like, especially when I was like, I mean, ultimately I wasn't like the best debater, because ultimately I kind of like threatened him. Like it was like, first of all, it's a fake leftist, like real. I mean, because these people, especially in Argentina, would be like very like pro Latin American, allegedly, like anti-imperialist and all that, but would mention like George Soros, or would mention like, I don't know, they wouldn't be as focused on the community. They would be more focused on their own personal comfort, like as we were saying with the fascists several shows before, like when we were with your friend, that this was like sort of like uncomfortable for them to be using a mask, and at the same time it's like, right, like what kind of a leftist are you if you don't like you aren't careful, and you aren't like preoccupied with your community and the community well-being and such, like on a greater, they focus more on like mass immunity. You've probably heard this all before.
You know, I know what you're talking about. Right. It's just interesting to hear. You know, there's overlap, and there's also sort of a different focus in terms of, I guess, where it comes from. These sentiments. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting perspective in terms of.
And at the same time, like I think Steve Bannon was like visiting at the time as well, and like probably disseminating something, but at the same time, just like as people say about like Sebastian Gorka and things like that, within the global community, there's like a mistrust of the United States, both from the inheritance of colonialism and imperialism, but at the same time, especially now, like with Trump and all that, there's like a complete mistrust. So you can have like people using like conspiracy theories. I think I had a friend. I mean, these are people that are like kind of like opportunistic, because I had a friend that I stopped being friends with, who's a painter, and like would be like, usually her forte was like alien conspiracies and things like that, like the whole thing about like Aryans and Aryan aliens and things like that, and their influence on global politics. And this went with like the mistrust of like vaccination, especially with COVID, and with Bill Gates. And what they would say, it would be like as well with this Argentinian illustrator, and it's people in graphic arts. These are not like immunologists. They'd probably like refer to like some sort of scientist, but they would be like discredited scientists, or they would misinterpret something that would say like in regards to the effectiveness, the current effectiveness of a tested vaccine and such. But I mean, they would say like basically they distrust Piñera, they would distrust Trump, but at the same time they would be distrustful of to a certain degree of science and effectiveness, or whether or not it's like, it's very fluid, because it's like, okay, so.
And I'm assuming there's the religious aspect as well, because I know that takes a big part in a lot of
Yeah,
South.
basically, no. They basically, yeah, among the evangelicals, it would be like God would save me, but at the same time, no, because it's at the same time they see it at least here they see it as like a sort of like divine, I guess, punishment or something like that. It would be like the plagues of Egypt or something like that.
Right.
But
All right.
I
All right.
mean,
Renee,
hmm,
let's jump because I think other people were trying to call in. But
okay,
I'm really
okay.
glad you called in with this. I thought this was really, really interesting in terms of basically where this sort of anti, vaccination belief lies
I mean,
in
especially this is tied also with like the kind of like industry wise how they are sometimes like not really ethical in regards of widespread testing in the global south. For instance, I think that France is testing out the vaccine in Brazil and what have you, and not to mention Africa, what goes
right,
on in Africa and all that.
right. All right, Renee. Thank you so much for the call. Always a pleasure.
Okay.
We have another caller on the line here. Let me pick up the phone here.
Hey, what's up, Matt?
Hey, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, this is Dave from Jamaica. Try to
Ah,
give
look
you.
at that! You actually sound different on Skype. I'm assuming you usually call into the majority port via the regular.
Text now. Yeah, I use a different free service type thing.
Right. You actually sound completely different, and in fact, if I do say so myself, you sound much clearer on my show than you do when you call into the majority port. Just because this show is just higher quality. You know what I mean?
Yeah, could be the nature of the Skype voice stuff. Maybe it carries
I,
better than browser stuff.
I'm so glad that you call in because I know I mentioned before I was joking with Renee about my favorite doomed regulars, but you are quite honestly one of my favorite majority port regulars. So thank you
Me?
so much. Yeah, you're great.
I just ask questions.
And that's sometimes the best callers. That's all they do. Not everyone could honestly. I mean, Renee calls into the show and tries to become his own guest. Sometimes he hits it out of the park, like today. Sometimes I have to cut him off and say, Renee, thanks for calling, but it's time for you to go, buddy. What would you like to talk about today, Dave from Jamaica?
Well, actually, I'm going to stick with your theme about the Q stuff. Can you
Okay,
hear me still?
yeah, it sounds perfect.
All right, good. So, like, I, from my observation of things, it seems though, whether with the whole Trump stuff and the Q stuff, at least from my end of the world, it seems to have at least activated people with more conservative worldviews outside of the States. They are more energized, I would say. They're more active. At least that's what I'm seeing because I'm hearing conspiracy theories left and right when I go to buy some stuff at the grocery store or so on. It seems I do think it is becoming more of a global phenomena,
Now,
which is a bit disturbing.
I mean, I'm assuming you are in Jamaica. Is that correct?
You're saying something, Matt?
Oh,
I couldn't hear you.
I'm assuming you are in Jamaica right now, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay. Now, it'd be really interesting to hear what is the QAnon version of the story, these conspiracies in Jamaica. Like, what is the conspiracy theories that are going around in Jamaica that are QAnon connected? Like, do they focus on the same things? Do they have their own conspiracy theories that you can tell sort of came from QAnon, but they're targeted for the Jamaican audience? Like what are the big conspiracies you were hearing when you go out?
I think I think, as you know, like with most media around the world, everybody watches American TV, right? So
Right.
that type of stuff tends to leak over, and people pick the stuff that they want. So, like, while Jamaica is mostly black, and I can confidently say most of us don't like Trump, there's still conservatives here, which still a lot of social conservatives. So they may not like Trump, but they don't necessarily like Democrats because of the allies they make, like
Right.
when it comes to like gay rights and so on and so forth. And as I think Renee was touching on it,
Right.
there is
Right.
some ugly stuff anti-imperialism, right?
Right.
Where people might conflate things like, well, oh, it's the Jews or it's the gays that are trying to take over the world, that type of nonsense. So
Now,
I think everybody's latching on to their piece that they want,
right. So the
and then
interesting.
ignoring the stuff they don't like.
Right. I mean, it's so easy to do a QAnon because you can basically translate whatever comes out of the Q drops and whatever you hear from anyone else to basically fit your own needs. You don't have to take it all wholesale. But
Right.
what's really interesting is that, you're telling me that even in Jamaica, even in, the QAnon world, I should say QAnon around the world, they still harp on the Trump aspects of the conspiracy. Like, I know that obviously the backbone is the Trump support. But you would think that, like, we were just talking about earlier with my guest, Rachel Greenspan of Insider, how in the wellness and yoga communities, they don't really, focus so much on the Trump stuff. They basically keep in tune with the Save the Children and the child trafficking rhetoric, and they try to keep the political stuff out of it. But what you're telling me is that some of the biggest QAnon conspiracies that permeate in Jamaica are very much related to Trump.
Well, it depends. I think it depends on who you're talking to. Like,
Right.
for most, it is the religious stuff that I think is universal. Like, it's old as time, the whole Hollywood conspiracy stuff. So people like to latch on to that. But like for those who are deeply religious, I think their gateway into it is like, well, we don't like gay people, and hence Trump is against gay people. So there must be some truth to it in that realm, and that's where they latch on to it. Like maybe with more affluent Jamaicans, you might see them believing the whole voter fraud stuff, but I think that's a minority of it. I think it's through the access of with the gay stuff or that the stuff that they don't like,
Right.
and then
You keep going back to the homophobic aspect of it. I think that's really interesting because it seems like, again, like this is a completely different experience than what Renee was sort of. I mean, obviously, there is the overarching theme of religion, but it seems like every
but as you know, with religion, everybody picks out their reasons that they particularly like, right? Depends on the
Right.
region.
Exactly. Yes, that's what that's exactly it. It's so interesting how, because it doesn't have to. There's no real need for, people in Jamaica to flock to QAnon stuff for this. There's been plenty of homophobic rhetoric.
But the thing is, as you said, sorry to interrupt.
No,
As you said, the
please.
QAnon stuff is like a big umbrella, right? So
Exactly.
they might not necessarily need to even follow Q. It's just Q is bringing up old conspiracies they always had. And that's the energizing factor.
Right. Right.
Like
So
the skepticism of vaccines or the creation of the virus type stuff
do,
comes
do,
from a very large distrust of the West or whatnot because they believe they make these viruses or whatnot and population the whole shebang.
Right. Well, in a lot of ways, I think people from certain parts of the world certainly have much more legitimate reasons to be cautious about trusting certain quote unquote good deeds coming from the U.S. Like someone here saying how they don't trust vaccines because they think Bill Gates is going to put a microchip in them. I mean, they've got really no reason to believe that from their own personal experience and how they get treated here. Whereas,
Right.
If a conspiracy about vaccines being flown in from the U.S. isn't welcomed in a country like Libya, where they might not be so happy to see flying, planes flying in from the U.S. to their country.
Well, trust me, it's completely understandable.
Exactly.
It's completely understandable, but at the same time, I think on the people who believe it, it's a bit of hypocrisy as well, because there's certain things that come from the West they're more than willing to accept, right?
Right,
It's
that's
just
very
that
true.
at the end of the day, they want to grind their axe first, and I guess I'm becoming less tolerant of it. But I have to be careful because I don't want to get into fights or anything like that. But I kind of want to call bullshit on it sometimes, because it is
I hear you.
frustrating, because it kind of distracts on things they maybe should be focusing on instead of things they shouldn't be. But
So what do you think is the driver in Jamaica of the spread of QAnon conspiracies? Is it the internet like it is here, or I mean, obviously the internet definitely plays a role, but is it as much as a role player in Jamaica, or is this something where a few people will get it online and then they'll spread it by word of mouth or via their churches?
I think it's more a case of QAnon didn't spread it. It's more like if I was an archaeologist and I found some bones. I think QAnon made the ground more fertile for these things. It brought it back into vogue, if you know what I'm saying. It was always there.
Right. So are you saying actually that there were certain aspects of some of the issues you brought up? Let's use the example of the homophobia, that were getting better in Jamaica by your account, and then QAnon sort of reverted it and made the country, at least in certain circles and certain communities, sort of regress?
I think.
Or is that giving too much credit even to?
I don't want. I don't. Yeah, I don't want to put the lipstick on this pig here, but we have issues with homophobia. Yes. Without the U.S.'s influence, so I don't think it's a case of them making it worse. If anything, the trend that worries me is more affluent Jamaicans are becoming more tolerant of homosexuality, while the lower classes are not, and that can set up for the future a very nasty class divide and further entrench homophobia, because it was like, oh, it's the rich guys who you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's a trend that kind of disturbs me more than anything else.
No, obviously, I'm no Michael Brooks, so I know nothing about Jamaican politics. So I'm sorry but I'm gonna ask because I have someone on the phone here who does know. What you just described, I mean, maybe not as with homophobia here so much anymore, but what you just described is a real dynamic we see in the U.S. where somehow more affluent people are becoming more progressive, whereas typically throughout the history of the U.S. it was more the more working class blue collar types were more toward the left, but we're seeing them become more conservative now. What do you think is driving that dynamic in Jamaica?
Well, I think, as I said, there's many things. Everywhere is different. With Jamaica in particular, the strong social conservatism is more complicated. It has many roots. Religion is one, of course, but there is anti-imperialism, misguided anti-imperialism that kind of informs it as well, because for certain people who have anti-imperialist view in Jamaica, they see the pillars of imperialism, one being like capitalism, right, and colonialism, right, but they also see homophobia as part of it. They think it's part of the cabal as well, and that's where they kind of go a little wrong.
What is like the equivalent to what is there a leftist party in Jamaica, or is your left wing party more like the Democratic Party, where they're like a?
Not anymore. This is my opinion. This is David's, not the whole of Jamaica. But far as I look on it, the current state of Jamaican political parties are without ideology, per se. It's more a debate. I can manage better. And
Wow. So
But
where
the
would you say
consensus is
where,
generally
where would you say all these political leaders sort of lie then in terms of ideological? Because I mean, obviously maybe there's not a spectrum in Jamaica like you just mentioned.
go ahead.
Maybe there's not a
I couldn't hear.
spectrum. Maybe there's not a
Hello, hello.
spectrum. Hello, hello. You hear me now?
Uh-oh. Did I
Uh,
lose you, Matt?
I hear you. Maybe you don't hear me though. All right, Dave from Jamaica. I really appreciate the
Matt, you
call.
still there?
Yeah, I'm gonna let you go,
No.
buddy. It's okay. I'm gonna let you know in the chat. I hear you. Unfortunately, you don't hear me. Thanks so much for the call, though. That was really interesting. I honestly, like I said, don't know anything about Jamaican politics. I know Dave from Jamaica said that he doesn't represent. Oh, he's calling. Wait, we got another call. Oh, we're getting tons of calls today. I love it. But I know Dave from Jamaica said he doesn't represent all of Jamaica. But as far as I'm concerned, he is the official ambassador of Jamaica. Because everything I know about Jamaica in terms of politics is from him calling into the majority port and now him calling into Doomed. But right now, who do we have calling in? Who's this?
It's Zoe.
Hey, Zoe. How you doing?
Good.
What would you like to talk about today, Zoe?
Well, I was kind of inspired, and
You're talking a little bit away from the mic. Like I could hear you, but it's coming in a little bit low. If you just get it closer to the mic, that'd be great.
is this better?
A little bit.
I don't know where my mic is.
That's right. Just talk loud, and you'll probably be fine.
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to talk about QAnon in Quebec.
This is the international QAnon second half. We have a caller from Chile, a caller from Jamaica, a caller from Quebec. This is fantastic. I mean, that means that I need to do shows where basically I dive into QAnon all over the world for you guys, because I'm sure everyone wants to know what's going on with this fucking conspiracy when it seeps into their country, town, city, neighborhood. It's a disaster, really. It's horrible. So tell us about what sort of shit QAnon is stirring up in Quebec.
Well, so basically, like, it's mostly started because of like anti-mask protests,
Right.
like, and with all that, Facebook groups, and it's been taken by the really like pro-nationalist groups here in Quebec, which is can be weird because they're very focused on the U.S. Like, there's no difference them from like it's all about America, but they use it like as basically like Trump as a symbol of like international struggle against like shadow cabal, the sex people. No.
Right. So basically, I guess Quebec has the closest. Well, I guess Canada as a whole probably has the closest QAnon centric movements that are closest to the U.S. I mean to say, like in terms of the pandemic and the anti-mask rhetoric, and then obviously I'm assuming you're seeing, as we get closer to a COVID-19 vaccine, you guys are seeing the anti-vaxxer QAnon stuff rev up, I'm sure. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also we also have like our own like Anthony Fauci.
Right. So he's become enemy number one, I assume, to those people.
Yeah, he's basically taken the place of Fauci. Like, they just changed the name.
Now, here's the interesting thing here. So you have here QAnon is a movement to basically stand for the president of the United States, literally the most powerful man in the world. And QAnon is here to basically prop him up as some sort of hero fighting against the the global elites who are taking part in this satanic child trafficking ring. Now, give us a hint of what's to come when Biden is inaugurated, as to what QAnon looks like in Canada when they're against the leader of the country, like I'm sure they are with Trudeau. Is that correct? I'm sure QAnon are no fans of Trudeau.
Nothing changes. They basically follow the American script. But also, what's particular about Quebec is that since we're French speaking, we also act as like the transmission of Q to the French world. So like even people in France take sources from here to be pro-QAnon.
That is. I got to do an episode on QAnon as a global event, because it really is something, and I'm especially. I'm not just saying this because I'm on the show and I want to be funny or I want to like make an observation. Like, it is very interesting to me how I do the show on QAnon, specifically how it's spreading into communities that are not the usual suspects in terms of like far right American fringe conspiracy theorists and misinformation spreaders and the typical groups. And here I have people calling in from all over the world to give similar sorts of stories. That to me means that there is certainly an undercovered aspect here. And I've seen it too in terms of when Facebook took down all their QAnon groups. They seem to have, it's certainly changed now, but they still exist too. But at first they sort of missed all the international QAnon groups. When you searched QAnon on Facebook right after they took down all the major US-based QAnon groups, when they put out that new policy that prohibited harmful misinformation, the only QAnon conspiracy groups left were Spanish language groups, and I believe I even saw some French and Italian groups. It was like stunning to see. Like, did they forget them, or did they just not prioritize those groups? But it's clear to me that there's something more than just the basics of QAnon on this global scale that needs more looking into. I really appreciate the call, Zoe.
Wait.
Oh wait, do you have something else to say?
Just wanted to say, like, it's very weird to see people like be super like pro-nationalist with their like Quebec flag, and then in their other hand they have an American flag and a MAGA cap.
Right. That's really interesting. I'm sure that's a thing. That's an aspect unique to Canada, I assume.
Yeah.
Make America great again, as their right wing ideology flaunts. I'm assuming Canada first, correct?
That's a thing. Yeah, but not really in Quebec.
All right. Thanks for the call, Zoe. Always a pleasure.
No problem.
Have a great night.
Thanks.
Bloop, bloop. Let's go to some super chats here. Renee said, "You want to remember hyperboles in the hollow Earth hypothesis?" I'm not familiar with what we're talking about here, Renee. I guess it was you brought this up when I said something in context during the interview. I'm sorry for missing it. Renee continues, "If anyone quotes Rumi, I'll scream. By the way, mention the precedent of Osho as fascist uprising in Washington." I'll have to look into that, Renee. Samantha Sider says, "I do acupuncture, but never heard of QAnus there." I mean, it wouldn't shock me if it's there. Those worlds do overlap a bit, don't they? Maybe it's just something you haven't come across, luckily, in your own experiences, which would make you very lucky. Dinah Cat Loves Me asks, "Do you think Trump will order Republicans not to vote in Georgia?" No, he's not going to do that. But he is fighting with but not him right now. But there are Republicans fighting with the fringe QAnon personalities who are. I mean, you have Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood, those two lawyers who are fighting to overturn election results, who believe in QAnon, holding a rally in Georgia, telling their followers not to vote in the Georgia runoff election because Dominion is running the Dominion machines will be used in those votes, and they don't trust it not to be rigged again, so don't bother. And then you have more mainstream conservatives like Newt Gingrich, who were once heralding those types, all of a sudden today turning on them, calling them, all sorts of names and telling people, please vote in the Georgia runoff elections. It is fantastic to watch, to be honest. It's really amazing to see the infighting. That's usually reserved for the left, but we're seeing this infighting here between the fringe right and the, I guess, mainstream far right. And it's fun to watch. Oh, let me what do I want to get to right now? There was one video I wanted to play. A lot of questions. I'm not gonna be able to get to all these people. I'm so sorry. I'll read a few comments really quick that aren't super chats because there's just so many people trying to ask questions. Where was I? I just saw. Josh says cucumbers do seem to love selling BS supplements, but yoga, haven't heard of that. In that case, though, it's the opposite. It's not QAnon followers peddling their bullshit. It's the bullshit that the QAnon followers are peddling appealed to the yoga audience. Born Beauty Star says, it's funny to watch Trump basically ruin Georgia. Has anyone seen the damage he's doing? LOL, can't be undone for the punks. It is really fantastic to watch. It is really incredible to see them completely go against each other. I'm not sure what's going on with the audio there. I'm sorry about that, Rizam. Apparently the audio goes super quiet again as the caller drops. My bad. I'm not sure where that happens. I'll put my audio up a bit more. Dorian says, it's almost like lacking a materialist analysis makes a person susceptible to dangerous bullshit. That is a huge part of it. Absolutely. I agree with Guigosul. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Zoe, you always have great stuff to say. Don't have to be shy. Yeah, Zoe, you call in and you sound sort of shy sometimes. Your calls are always great. Please feel free. If you feel comfortable, delivering your lines, your calls like that, I'm not gonna force you to change. But I just wanted to let you know that you're a great caller and feel free to get more comfortable when you call in. Walrus says QAnon agents cut Dave off. They did, didn't they? Unbelievable. No, but Dave from Jamaica is a great caller. He calls into the Majority Report a lot, and now that he called into this show, I hope he calls into this show whenever he listens. I really enjoy Dave's calls. We got another super chat here. Wealth for 99 with Drew Rice. You should reach out to Ben Burgess and cross-pollinate with his channel. Keep up the great work, Matt. I really appreciate that, Drew. And I was on... I definitely should reach out to Ben Burgess. And I just want to say that I've never been on his show, and he's never been on this show. But we did cross paths for the first time and only time so far in February, because we were both guests on, I guess, what's now... did he do one after? I don't know. Well, at least the last New York Michael Brooks show, live show. Honestly, when I'm so happy Michael asked me to be on that show. I mean, when he asked me, I was happy. Period, because I wanted to be on his live show because I had left the majority port before they did their few live shows. And I'd always pushed sort of in the background to Michael and Sam, like, oh, how cool it'd be to do a live show. And so by the time I left, we had not done one. And so to see the majority port and then Michael Brooks do a live show, I was like, ah, shit, someone's got to invite me on one of those because I want to do one. It sounds like tons of fun. And so that's why I was pumped Michael invited me on that one to begin with. But if I knew it was going to be the last time I saw Michael in the flesh, I didn't know. So I'm just that more grateful that he invited me to A, see him in February, B, get to do a show with him, a live show with him, and C, our segment, the whole show was fantastic, but the segment with Michael and I, it was like the Matt and Michael Mondays, old time sake. Like it felt like we went back in time, but at the same time we were at our best and blew everything we previously did for all those years, hosting Mondays on the Majority Report. We blew all that out of the water. It was really, I had so much fun all around with him on that show. And really lucky he asked me to be on that show. And I'm getting a little bit emotional now. I'll take a comment or two more, and then we really went along today. Ooh. I think I'm gonna do this now that I have my own room here. Because if you're not familiar, if you're listening to the show for the first time, just this month I moved, and for the first time I have not really a room, but a closed closet space away from my two kids, who I love dearly, but I can't do the show with them running around. And so the reason I do a late night show is because I wait for them to go to sleep. But also with this closed space, I could do more shows. That's the plan. So what I think I'm going to do is to make sure I give you guys more time for questions and comments and calls, is maybe I will just start doing an interview show. And then when that interview is over, maybe I'll take some comments and questions specifically about that interview. But then I'll do a second show during the week, where I just take questions, comments, and calls, and we can just focus on, chit-chatting and shooting the shit and talking about other things in the news. So yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I gotta grow the show too. So, let's get me to a couple more patrons, and then I'll start planning out expanding it to more streams and videos. I wanted to play this clip actually before we go. Let me pull it up. We played this in the Majority Port when I was on there earlier today. And it really is a fascinating clip. So basically, a local news station in Michigan was setting up for an outside segment, and they were basically had put their cameras up outside a small business that has remained open. It was like a restaurant or a bar and grill type joint, and it stayed open despite the lockdown measures in Michigan. And the owner comes out and confronts the news reporter. And the news reporter sort of used this as an opportunity to put forward, if you're going to come and interrupt our feed and start yelling behind us, then I'm going to, do my journalistic duty and turn around and I'm going to ask you some questions. And, props to him for giving the guy time and asking him questions. And, and Matt Leck mentioned this earlier, and I completely agree. It is a very dangerous time for the local newscasters. You don't know what's going to happen with all this media and, fake news rhetoric coming from the president of the United States. And, all across the country, you see these right-wingers approach local news reporters from behind as they're setting up for a segment. And you never know what one of them are going to do. It's certainly They need to be very cautious. Major props to them. But I think the more important aspect of this particular exchange is this back and forth and what basically this small business owner says. Let's listen to this clip because it really is fascinating to me. Let me pull it up on the screen here, and here we go.
The details on why the judge said no.
Here on this cafe,
Tavarius, is everything okay?
okay. Our government leaders have abandoned me.
Are you the owner?
$4 trillion of stimulus money. They gave it to who? Special interest groups and campaign donors. I'm Dave Morse. I own the place.
So what's going on?
What's going on? You know what's going on.
Tell me. You tell me.
Hey, we got a government that has taken the stimulus money. They gave it to special campaign donors. They gave it to special interests. They abandoned me, and they have put me in a position where I have to fight back. Okay?
So do you feel that this is the right thing to do?
Absolutely. I feel everybody needs to stand up. Hey, listen, there was enough money to give every family in this country $20,000 to go home for 2 months. They chose to give it to special interests and campaign donors, the Kennedy Space Center, and they abandoned us. So you could have given me money. I'd gladly walk away for 60 days and let this virus settle down. I'm not going to do it alone. Okay?
Are you going to continue to violate the state's orders and stay open?
This is a state order. This isn't an order. This is a conspiracy. This is a tyranny.
What do you want to tell other restaurant owners who...
Wake up. Stand up. This is America. Be free. I got patriots coming out supporting me.
Now, I play this clip because I want to really point out that we don't know what this guy's, where this guy lies on the ideological spectrum. We just don't, but from the different, the words he used and the way he framed things, I mean, I feel pretty confident saying this guy is a right-winger. He probably voted for Trump. If not Trump specifically, he probably usually votes Republican. He threw out the patriots coming down to support him. He wanted people to wake up from the tyranny of the of these lockdown measures. He mentioned the Kennedy Space Center as one of the groups that received stimulus money. And these are that's prime. And I think on the Majority Report earlier we mentioned how he probably meant like the Kennedy Arts Center. And these are usually the prime targets of a lot of right-wing media. So clearly he's at least consuming this right-wing media, which is where he gets this terminology and these talking points from. But listen to what he said and really, really pay attention and focus on his talking about what he would have done if the government took care of him. That's not right-wing speak. He didn't get that from right-wing media. He didn't get that from watching Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity on Fox News. He didn't get that from Lou Dobbs on Fox Business. He didn't get that from listening to OAN, to Newsmax. He didn't get that from listening to Rush Limbaugh while he's driving downtown. He is basically espousing what is frankly a left-wing ideal. He's basically saying that if the government, if the social safety net, if the welfare state took care of the people of this country, which is the job of the government, the federal government, and paid everyone so that they could basically live under lockdown for, he even said 60 days, 2 months, he would have been happy to do it in order to in his words, let the virus settle down. I mean, A, he's admitting that this is a real thing. And then B, he's basically saying that he's fine with the lockdowns that, usually from right-wingers, that the lockdowns themselves are the tyrannical portion of the tyrannical portion of all these different guidelines and measures. That's the real problem. No, but what this guy's saying is no. He's saying the real problem is you didn't give me money. You didn't take care of my basic necessities so that I can live, so that I could take care of myself, my family, my employees, and you left me with no choice but to open up. This is not a guy protesting outside the state capitol because he wants his haircut. He needs his barbershop to open so he can get a haircut. This isn't a guy who's claiming that he wants to drink his cocktail at his favorite bar. This isn't one of those cases of just a selfish, right-winger yelling about the freedom to do these extracurricular activities during a pandemic and put the service industry workers in harm's way so basically they could take advantage of their services. This is a guy basically saying, I would have been happy to fight this virus if you guys just helped me do it. It's fascinating to hear that, to see, I should say, that this breaks through even a guy who so clearly has consumed so much right-wing media, that he's espousing these right-wing talking points. Even a guy like that can't help but see the truth, and that truth is something the left is fighting for. Everyone should be getting paid. Everyone. His number is 20,000 too. That's fantastic. I would love 20,000 for 2 months. That's $10,000 for 2 months. Basically, to let this virus settle. Listen, if you gave $20,000 to every household, even, this virus would be, you would still have your people, your don't tread on me people out there just for their, to push for their agendas. But the majority of people with $20,000 would stay home and be able to provide for their family without having to go out and work. And, obviously the Republican Party doesn't want that. But at the same time, the Democrats blew it with the messaging. When you have this guy, when what should be their position that they fight for is this guy's, basically what's obvious to this guy, even after consuming right-wing media, and it's not breaking through that the party closest to wanting to give you something at the very least is the Democratic Party, then there's a real messaging problem. Because this guy would easily vote Democrat if he saw the checks come in from a Joe Biden administration saying, hey, let me take care of you so we could fight this virus together and you could safely shut down your establishment for a few weeks, maybe even a few months. I mean, we could do this. We could defeat this virus. We can make this. I mean, Joe Biden's today said, he's spoken to experts, and from the trajectory we're currently on, it would not be surprising, he said, to see 250,000 more people dead in this country from COVID by January. In a month and a half. We can stop this. We can help people out. We can give them the money they need to take care of themselves and their family and the people who depend on them to provide for themselves and their family. And we can defeat this virus. It's common sense to even someone who consumes right-wing media. But we got to do it. I really wanted to play that clip because I thought it was, this guy on the screen here behind me is just, I don't even know if he realizes what he said. He probably doesn't. Giving money to people is just popular. Without a doubt, people voted for Donald Trump this year because they got a $1,200 check in the mail with his name signed onto it. I am guaranteeing you, people got that check and that influenced their vote for Donald Trump. People who did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016, people who didn't vote at all in 2016, came out in 2020 and voted for Trump because of that check. I mean, he right now, right behind Joe Biden, the second most votes in the history of U.S. election. Only person with more votes than him is the guy who beat him. Trump has surpassed Obama's records. He got less votes than Hillary in 2016. He surpassed that, even Hillary's vote total now in 2020. I mean, you can't convince me otherwise. Give people money when they are in need, and they will thank you for life. It shouldn't be hard to do. That's the government's job. All right, folks. Oh, let me get to, we got a few more super chats, and I can't miss them. Renee says, oh yeah, the Fash autonomous zone in Long Island over a bar being shut down for service, not delivery. Yeah, those guys are ridiculous. They were chants for like, I want my margarita or a mimosa or something like that, or cocktail. That's what I was referencing when I said that. That's not the same as this guy. Vinny with another super chat says, what pisses me off is that Joe Rogan and Josh Hawley types are the only ones winning this guy over. This should be an easy leftist voter to win. I don't even think this guy knows about Joe Rogan and Josh Hawley, to be honest. I mean, maybe he does, but what he's espousing is not like the Joe Rogan, Josh Hawley type talking points, or because they don't really, that's not their wheelhouse in terms of what this guy said. But you know, this is totally something what he said about like the Kennedy Space Center. That's totally something he got from like Limbaugh, someone like that at the very least. You know, it doesn't have to be like this. We can totally turn things around. We can at the same time we could kill two birds with one stone. We could fight this coronavirus so we get the levels of the number of people dying to levels much lower than where we are right now. We could possibly maybe one day look like even how like China or Thailand or other countries that have done such a good job now of fighting the virus. We could look like them. You know, in Asian countries, East Asian countries, I believe, they're back in the club. They're having live outdoor concerts. They're packing the restaurants. They've done it. It doesn't have to be like this. And we can kill two birds with one stone. We could defeat the virus, less people dying, and take care of people to the point where they realize that, oh man, my ideology, what I actually believe, maybe it's not so right-wing at all if this is what the Democratic Party's doing for me. I mean, it's right there for the taking. Democrats don't ever have to worry about losing a working class voter, or even like a working a small business owner like this guy who's doesn't look like he's insanely wealthy. I mean, maybe he's doing well for himself. Maybe he lives quite comfortably in Michigan. I don't know, but he doesn't look like he's like some multi-millionaire. I mean, especially if he's talking about how he has to stay open, otherwise his business won't be able to last. We could win these people over. Mariah with a super chat says, missed most of the interview but love this convo. That clip was astounding. The socialist message wins over right-wing talking points. Right, and this is coming from a guy who wasn't fed this stuff. Like, he was fed these right-wing talking points. And still, after repeating them, the common sense fix that he came up with is socialist rhetoric. Come on. We can't drop the ball here. This is an opportunity to do exactly what I just said. Two birds, one stone. Save people and bring them to the realization that they actually are probably more progressive than they think. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But folks, it's been a fantastic show. From the interview to the calls to the super chat comments to this clip. I've had tons of fun with you guys tonight. Patrons, thank you so much for supporting this show. It really means the world to me. I'm when I see the number of patrons, I mean, even being that it's like, we are certainly on the lower end of the patron spectrum when it comes to like the some of these other podcasts and live streams, but just seeing the number where we're at right now, I'm ecstatic about where we're going, because it's I'm very I'm looking up. Things are looking up for the show, I think. So yeah, thanks again, guys. Appreciate it. If you're not a patron, patreon.com/MattBinder. Really appreciate any support you can give. But until next time, have a great week. And see you all next time on Doomed.